So, hello everyone. Welcome to the 7th webinar in the Joint Tran-SET webinar series, which will cover a variety of research projects related to innovative techniques to optimize, enhance, and facilitate freight movement. This webinar is jointly hosted by Tran-SET, which is Region 6 University Transportation Center, and by the Consortium of Cooperative Mobility for Competitive Mega Regions, which is US DOT Tier 1 University Transportation Center, led by University of Texas at Austin. Today we will have 3 20-minute presentations. We will save questions until the end of those 3 presentations for a quick 15 to 20-minute group Q&A. The questions will come from the Q&A box, so please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Katie Hyun. Dr. Katie Hyun is an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Texas at Arlington. For the past 2 years, she has served as a PI and co-PI on 15 projects, including 10 awards funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation and 2 state DOTs. Dr. Hyun utilizes her expertise in big data analytics and machine learning techniques to understand the unique travel patterns of commercial vehicles. She is actively involved with freight community and serving as a committee member of Trucking Industry Research and Urban Freight Logistics in the TRB.
Can I start?
Yeah, I think we can see your presentation.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for a nice introduction. Good afternoon. My name is Kate Hyun. I am an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. So here today, I'm going to talk about one of my Tran-SET projects that I have been working on the past 6 months. So this is still ongoing project supported by Tran-SET. And today I'm going to show you, I like to share some like the motivation of this study and some preliminary results of this study. So this is, the title is The Impacts of Increased Adverse Weather Impacts on Freight Movements. And my student Meridad helped me preparing this presentation. So today I'm going to talk about the background first, the motivation of this study, and introduce the study area, and share with the data that we are using for this study and some of the methodologies, some preliminary, and then some preliminary results, and I'll conclude with the future work. So let me start with the background of the freight transportation and why freight transportation matters. So we, in Texas and the region, nationally, internationally, we have experiencing population growth and employment growth. With that, we also experiencing the freight movements increase very rapidly. So by the year of 2040, the freight movements in the nation will be expected by 42%. Because our population is really rapidly growing. So in Texas, only in current days in 2018, like current days, our population is estimated 28 million, but in 2040, we are expecting it will grow. It will increase to 39 million populations. With that, we are expecting a lot of freight. And one of the US DOT report shared that if we do not build any more highways or adding any capacity to the current infrastructure, then the truck as well as our passenger vehicle will increase the congestion by 34% in 2040. with this increasing freight movements, along with our passenger car movements, coupled with many weather events we're experiencing in these days, our concern is increasing. So because this impacts from the severe events, especially for the freight movement, will cause an economic loss in not only Texas, but throughout the region and nationally. Support here, I'm mainly talking of the port trucks, and also wanted to investigate how these port trucks are affected by these adverse weather impacts. So today I'm going to talk about a lot of ports, but one of the big impact, the reason of the big impact of this port truck is their location. They're located in coastal area. So if the weather events coming, including flooding or the hurricanes, then this port area is subject to more like severe and frequent risk. So let me introduce this hurricane, the big hurricane we as a Texan experienced in 2017. The Hurricane Harvey was a Category 4 storm, and it brought huge impact, especially to the Houston area. So it inflicted $125 billion in total in damage. So just the first week, the storm affected nearly 10% of all US trucking and other transportation throughout Texas area because it flooded roadways and damaged the infrastructure. And these photos, like 3 photos I prepared in the right-hand side, are really showing well about the impacts, the magnitude of this Hurricane Harvey on our highway infrastructure. To better respond this type of severe weather events, the Texas DOT prepared this freight mobility plan. Their goal was to maintain infrastructure and also improve the system efficiency by increasing the resiliency of the state freight transportation system. So their plan largely include the short-term and the long-range plan. Both of them aims to develop strategy to minimize the impacts on the freight network by designing flexible and reliable freight transportation. And they made this one of their regional priority. So this Texas Mobility Plan is well aligned with our project goals. So our project first is to understand the port truck movements better. So we are identifying the operational patterns of this port truck movement by industry and the service type. And also we evaluate the response during the adverse weather impacts. Our study area is the Port of Houston, which is largely affected by the Hurricane Harvey. So we are using this Harvey case in the Houston area to understand the port truck flows before and after the Harvey area. And we also expand our study to the metropolitan region, like Houston, Galveston Area Council, and further destination in Texas. So let me go a little deeper in our Texas, the study area. So let me start with the Port of Houston. This map is showing where the Port of Houston is located. It is located in the city of Houston, which is the 4th largest city in the US. The Port of Houston is the busiest port in the US in terms of the foreign tonnage, and the second busiest in the US in terms of over tonnage. And in worldwide, it's the 16th busiest port. So it's a straightforward, the Port of Houston is one of the big ports in the US. So the table in the bottom is showing how fast it's growing. It shows the export container tonnage by year. So I have other ports as well. So the Los Angeles and Long Beach, one of our biggest port complex in the US, they have 29 million tons in 2011. In Houston, we have 1/3 of their volume. So we have 10 million tons in 2011. But what's important here is that we are constantly growing. See here, 2012 up until 2015, we have vastly growing, a little dip in 2016, but on average, we show over 5.4% increase in tonnage. Compared to other ports, which shows a little decrease or the constant level, it's pretty clear that Houston is not only handling a lot of tonnage, but also one of the fast growing ports in the US. So because we are looking at the port port cargoes, the port truck movement. So let me explain how the cargo actually are moved over port trucks. Once these containers are unloaded from the ship and it arrives at the terminal, then they can go the rail terminal, either on dock or near dock. Both of them are really close to the main terminal. So the trucks are not or rarely involved with this process, and they're just shipped by the rail for their destination. Or the container can be loaded on the trucks and can go to off-dock rail terminal and shipped by the rail. It involves the short trip of the trucks. Or it could go to transload or storage yard location so that they could be sorted and repackaged into the large size truck trailers so that they could use 53 container or enclosed bin, a little bit bigger trucks, and they can go to either the off-dock yard or other destination, including local and non-local warehouses. Or it could directly, from the terminal, it could directly go to the local store or the factories. So in this study, we are going to focus on these three types of, in this presentation, I only have this really shorter distance, the off-dock, the transload facility movements. A little bit more detail on the Port of Houston. So Port of Houston consists of 9 different, actually more than 9, but mainly 9 different ports. So biggest port is the Barbas Cut, which you can see on the right-hand side of the map, and it handles over 1 million TEU. The second largest is a little bit down there, the Bayport Container. So there are 2 major general cargo terminals. And then we have other cargo terminals, including the turning basin. You see the photo of the turning basin there, and they're handling containers and also other type of big size cargo. And the Port of Houston also has the one private cargo terminal called Manchester. Here are some port facilities that we are looking at this presentation. So here I have 9 different locations, the local destination of the port trucks, but I grouped them into 2 different categories. The red dots here are showing the rail terminal. So they are off-dock rail terminal, like you see in the photo down the left-hand side. We have 3 locations, 2 from Union Pacific and 1 BNSF. Then we also have 6 different depot locations, including Gulf Transport and other private companies. That is depot location, you can consider them as transloading or the local warehouses or temporary parking spaces for sorting, repackaging the port the cargo. So the data, let me move on to the data and how we collect the data and what kind of data we are using for this analysis. And before actually jumping into the data that we applied, I'd like to highlight this unique characteristics of the truck travel behaviors. So there are 2 graphs on the right-hand side. They are collected in actually California. So the first graph is collected near the port area, and it is showing the time of day volume of tractor trailers. So this is not about the port trucks. This is all the 18-wheeler, the tractor trailer trucks collected near the port area in California, the port of Los Angeles. So I just pick a random day and show you this time of day pattern, and you'll see here, like 10 a.m. or the noon time, you'll see the volume reaches up to 1,000. So we expect like 1,000 trucks at that hour, in that 1 hour near the port. During the weekday, which is the blue line graph there. However, in the weekend, which is the red graph, we barely see the trucks. We see 1,000 trucks on the weekday, but the weekend we see less than 50 trucks. It's because its data is collected near the port area. The port is not operating during the weekend. That's why we see such a huge volume during the weekday and such a low volume during the weekend. But urban area, the weekday weekend pattern, they are pretty similar, although the weekend we have little less, a lot less volume, but the general pattern are really similar. It's because the trucks serving urban area are mostly local serving trucks. That's why we see the similar pattern, even if it's the weekday or the weekend. So what I'm trying to make point here is that trucks serve in different industries or the service, which means that they will have different delivery schedules and route choice behavior. So this different behaviors makes their trip movements spatially and temporally varying. So it is really important to understand the truck movements with the large size data as opposed to the sample data, because their travel a larger portion of vehicle traffic over a larger area, which could reduce the sampling bias. And so we use this data before and after Harvey so that we can understand how their behavior changes over time and how their behaviors change by the Harvey when they face the network disruption. So let me introduce the methodology really briefly. So we use some conventional performance measures. The first set of analysis. So we use the performance measure of zonal OD and travel routes by different level of geography. So first we use the port. We look at the port operation and we see the regional movements using the FAF zones, and then we look at the local trips such as the railway terminal and transfer points. We call this depot from this slide. Here's some brief summaries. So port, again, we are going to look at the operational pattern prior to the Harvey and during the Harvey. And we also look at how they change their major route, how they pick their major routes from the port to further other destinations. For the regional level, we look at FAF movements by seasonal and during the Harvey and see how link disruption impacted their regional movements. And the local, we look at railroad terminal and depot and see how their route choices are differ for these local trips during the Harvey season, during the Harvey times. So some preliminary result in here. So this one is showing the port operational by seasonally from 2017 winter to all the way to 2019 fall. So each year we have 4 different bar graphs by season. The blue is showing the 2017, red showing 2018, and green showing 2019 for 2 major ports. The Barbados Cut is the biggest port, the Port of Houston complex. The second busiest one, the Bayport Container Terminal. You see here, 17, 18, 19, they're varying. However, we can't really tell the impact of the Harvey. The Harvey, the fall 17, so I made it a little dark, but in this seasonal pattern, we can't say the Harvey impacted on their operational. However, if you look at daily, then we can clearly see the impact in here. These graphs are showing the average daily zonal traffic for the biggest ports. Barbados Cut the left, the Bayport the right side. And here we have day by day volume, average volume, starting from August 11th all the way to September 21st, 2017. The blue one, the first 5 graphs, the 5 days, it's normal days. And then the red one starting August 18th through the August 24th, we know that the Harvey is coming, but it has not affected the Houston area. It was in the Gulf Coast. So I called it onset. And August 25th to August 31st, which I don't have in here because port closed. the port was exactly in the center of the impact, so they closed, and we had zero activity during the period. After that, from September 1st, we experienced this significant flooding and network disruption. So you see here a quick drop of this average volume. This bar was cut. The peak area I divided each week. So we have a peak week, and then we go to the recovery week from September 8th. So the normal days and onset, we don't see very spatial, like a distinct pattern here, but peak, we see the quick drop. However, September 5th, right after we experience the quick drop, it also see the quick pick up. So it'll quickly pick up and show the normal activity throughout. However, if you look at the second graph, the Bayport, now we are seeing a little different patterns in here. The normal days, in the onset, we see gradual decrease, and peak, we see a further decrease, and then it's picked up. However, it's also gradually recovered. It's gradually recovering throughout the week, and also the following week, the recovery week, and then it becomes normal, the third week from the onset. We also look at how the route changes has changed over this time. The left one is showing the normal days, like the link, and I picked some 3 different links and show you the volume. One of the busiest link from the port, we observed 22,000 trips there daily. However, during the hurricane, we see it's dropped to 12,000. So 10,000 trips were decreased at the exactly same link. The further links, like where we see 2,500 volume, it decreased to 880, so 1/3 of what we experience in normal days. We also see that their destination changes. Normal days, they go to further destinations, southern to northern, but during the hurricane, you see the southern part activity was nearly zero. Now we move on to regional movements. So this slide is showing the regional, the movements from the port to 2 different neighboring FABs. So one is the first one is the Bowman, and the second the Houston. So from the port to Bowman and port to Houston. Again, daily traffic by onset, peak, and recovery week. The Bowman, the onset, we don't observe the specific pattern here, but the peak area, we see significant drop. Then September 5th, we did not see, actually September 4th, we did not see any activity at all. Then it's slowly picked up, and recovery season, still we are seeing less movement compared to the normal days. However, the Houston area also, it shows a little different pattern here. The onset, the normal activity, the peak, we see some drop there, but it quickly picked up and resumed their activity right after the September 5th. This slide showing how the route disruption impacted to regional movement. So it's the first graph, the first figure showing the port to Bowman during the normal days. So they are 100% of trucks are actually using I-10 to move the cargo from the port to the Bowman. But during hurricane season, 18% of trucks are actually rerouted and use the alternate routes because of the route link disruption on the I-10. Now we'll look at the local movements in here. So this graph is showing the average daily traffic by the week. So the first, and by the type of destination. The blue one is showing the depot, so port to depot, and the red one is showing the Port of Houston to railroad terminals. The depot, the normal days, we see 160, but onset little decrease, and the peak we see 0. We did not see any local movement from the port to depot, and recovery we see more than we saw the normal days. It's because we suspect that they have to pick up the cargoes that did not deliver during the peak week. The railroad, the normal days and onset, it's decreased. However, the peak and recovery, their recovery time is pretty quick and it's quickly recover compared to what we see from the depot. And their route choice for local trips. The normal days, so one of the busiest link is showing 10,000 trips from port to the local destination. However, during the hurricane season, we see 1/10, like 10% of trip only. So this is our conclusion, and this is the ongoing projects, and so far what we observe is the hurricane impacted these OD movements and link and route choices during the peak and or recovery times, but it will all depend on the type of ports and type of movements. We see difference between the regional and local movements. And these spatially and temporally varying patterns require further investigation on more disaggregate level of impact analysis. So here is what we'll do for the next 6 months for this Tran-SET project. We will develop resiliency measures to better understand and quantify the impact. We also see that by ports, by location, their performance are different. So we are going to develop the performance measure, detect this special pattern or the abnormality from the typical behavior so that we can understand better how the link disruption affected different types of movements. We believe that this type of approach in the framework will help agencies for their fast system recovery that will eventually minimize the economic, social, and human impacts from the events. Our goal is to make a framework that agencies can directly adopt for their mitigation strategies. And we hope that our analysis and further investigation can help predicting the route choices or transportation mode choices or port trucks delivery schedule changes caused by severe weather events. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Hyun. So Dr. Walton was supposed to be the second speaker. Unfortunately, he got ill today and he will not be able to participate. So Rydell is a PhD candidate who works with Dr. Walton, will give the presentation in his place. Rydell Wothall is a PhD candidate with Dr. Walton, who has obtained his master's degree in Public Affairs and Transportation Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. He has performed freight research for the Austin District of Texas DOT, Texas DOT's Freight Division, the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the Cooperative Mobility for Competitive Mega Regions Consortium. Rydell specializes in travel demand modeling, transportation economics, alternative energy policy, and freight rail energy modeling.
Thank you for that introduction. All right, so the talk today is about a database we've developed that can assist with freight research, and specifically in looking at planning capabilities between regions. Dr. Walton expresses his regret at not being able to present himself, and he wanted to thank everyone for allowing us to participate in this webinar, and asked me to thank both Tran-SET and CM2 for the collaborative opportunities they provide. So today's talk is going to consist of today's talk discusses work conducted to take stock of mega-regional planning capabilities. I'll discuss the motivation of this work, the MPO database we created with other CM2 researchers to accomplish this task, some of the findings from that database, and the implications those findings have towards the creation of coherent mega-regional freight planning strategies. First, I'll start with the motivation of this work. And the planning capabilities in mega regions and even in smaller regions will be able to affect the types of projects that are considered. They vary widely, and for example, they affect the type of benefits that will be modeled from projects. They affect the type of stakeholders that will be included and the way those stakeholders are able to give feedback. So for example, when looking at MPOs, which is what most of this work focuses on, we want to know the type of model the MPO is using, four-step versus activity-based versus other types, and the modes that they are included. So for example, if freight is not modeled in their work, then that region might underestimate the freight benefits of a particular project. In the context of freight stakeholder input, examples would be whether an MPO has freight representation on its policy board or a committee that is dedicated to freight issues or others. This is part of, as I mentioned, other CM2 work. So we didn't look at only freight, but also other non-automotive modes. So next I'll move on to the database that we created and the sources that we used and how it was organized. So it was developed in collaboration with two other CM2 projects, one led by Dr. Shara, who is also at UT Austin, and one by Dr. Ryerson at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Shara's project looked at transit and Dr. Ryerson's looked at airports. And there was a third project also led by Dr. Walton, which was looking at active transport. So together this database was built to look at planning capabilities for all four of those non-automotive modes. And each entry in the database is an MPO. The variables include things like the MPO's representation for each non-automotive mode or the type of travel demand model the MPO uses. The researchers were able to create a comprehensive database of all 404 MPOs across the country. And it is broadly structured into governance variables, committee variables, and modeling variables. It compiles information about how each MPO addresses planning for non-automotive modes, including freight. I'll discuss each of the three categories in more detail next. So first, starting with the governance structure variables, we examined the size and composition of each MPO's decision-making body, normally the policy board of that MPO. We looked separately at the voting and non-voting seats on the board, and also looked at whether any seats were dedicated to particular modes. So for example, whether the head of a transit agency was given a seat on the board, whether an airport representative was given a seat on the board, things of that nature. The next category in the database was committee variables, where the variables show whether the committee has whether the MPO has a dedicated committee to examine projects relevant for each non-automotive mode. So we looked at transit committees, active transport committees, including separate bicycle or pedestrian committees, and airport committees. In both the governance structure and the committee variables, the existence of seats or committees dedicated only to freight issues was very rare. So rather than creating separate variables for freight in those categories, we only noted the MPOs that had that, and that is in the full version of the database. Then the last category of variables was modeling variables, and for that, we tried to show the type of travel demand model that each MPO is using, and also whether non-automotive modes are included in the model and how they are modeled. So for example, these variables will differentiate whether freight is assigned to a network or if it is excluded entirely. For transit, it would show whether it is included in the mode choice step as an option and then dropped out of assignment, or whether it is included in both mode choice and then carried through into assignment to a separate transit network. And then we're also able to answer questions about the type of model, so how many MPOs are using activity-based models versus classic four-step models. And then also just simpler models than the four-step as well. For sources, we primarily used MPO bylaws, websites, and model documentation. The researchers on this database came from all of those separate CM2 projects, and we had regular meetings to ensure that the MPOs were being categorized consistently. Sometimes there was a bit of ambiguousness about whether a particular seat might be considered representative in a particular category, so we tried to make that as consistent as possible across all 404 MPOs. And then when those sources weren't readily available, we would try to contact the MPOs directly. The bylaws for each MPO answered most of the variables for the governance structure. The websites provided information about what committees the MPO has, and then obviously the model documentation was able to show us information about the models themselves. And when the documentation was not available, we would often be able to find information about the models being used based on the results provided in each MPO's long-range transportation plan. So that is the database we developed, and next I'll be talking about some of the findings from that database and how they can relate to megaregional planning. So with the database, the two types of questions we're primarily able to answer are how do different MPOs plan for non-automotive modes, and how consistent is planning across a megaregion. For our work, we've used the America 2050 megaregional definitions, which defines 11 separate megaregions. On this map, each circle is an MPO, and each shaded area is a separate megaregion. To achieve megaregional planning for projects spanning many MPOs, we basically want to know what each MPO is doing within a megaregion. So if MPOs are using different planning tools, then freight projects that often span many MPOs across these large regions might be evaluated differently or inconsistently, and might not have the same level of input across entire corridors. So moving on to actual results from the, this is a sample of some of the information that is available from the database. So looking at the governance structure, first, the size of the policy board will vary considerably from MPO to MPO. the vast majority are sitting at up to 20 voting seats, but as you can see, the distribution has a very long right tail. This is not always related to the size of the MPO. We found very small MPOs that still have a large number of voting seats and very large MPOs. For instance, the Austin MPO Campo, where we're located, has a fairly small policy board, even though the population is around just under 2 million. So rather than population, the size of the board we found to be much more closely related to whether the MPO is independent versus part of a council of governments. And sometimes some states will provide guidance on the type of representation all of the MPOs within the state are supposed to provide. Very few small MPOs have seats dedicated to transit representation, but as you get larger, it becomes much more common to have at least some transit representation on the board. And almost no MPOs have voting seats dedicated to freight stakeholders. One notable exception would be in the Chicago area. Several of the freight rail companies are given representation. But in general, that is fairly rare, we found. Moving on to committee findings. About 1 in 4 MPOs have active transport committees, either bicycle committees or pedestrian committees, although the bicycle committees are more common of the two. 1 in 8 have transit committees, and as discussed, that's more common among the top 20 percentile by population. And fewer than 1 in 40 have freight or airport committees. A couple of the largest ones, like the Southern California Association of Governments in Los Angeles and the North Central Texas Council of Governments in DFW, are examples of MPOs with such committees. The smallest MPO we found that had, in this case, an airport committee, was the Orange County MPO just north of New York City. So this is more information about the number of MPOs with particular types of committees. Here we've divided the MPOs into deciles by population. And you can see that the larger the MPO, the more committees it will have in looking at each alternative transportation mode. And airport committees, which are often the closest that many MPOs will have for anything related to freight movements, become, well, they're rare in general, but non-existent for more than half of MPOs in the smaller population brackets. And then I'll talk a bit about the modeling findings. You see a similar trend by population, where smaller MPOs have simpler models that don't include as many modes, although active transport, freight, and transit were found in at least some MPOs in every decile, and also all absent in at least some MPOs in every decile. So all of them become more common as the population increases, but never become pervasive. So last, I'm going to talk about what some of the findings we gathered from the database how they relate to consistent freight planning. Going back to that mega-regional map, as I mentioned, many MPOs across the country are considering freight issues, but we don't have consistency across mega-regions. As you can see, some of these mega-regions have a considerable number of MPOs, and we tracked that and also created a capability to divide the database into particular mega-regions. So you can see how common a particular type of planning input is. And the Great Lakes and Northeast mega-regions have by far the most MPOs, followed by the Piedmont Atlantic and the Florida mega-regions. Florida is an interesting case because it is a mega-region where all of its MPOs are within the same state, and the state of Florida has planning guidelines that it sets for all of the MPOs, even to the extent of providing the travel demand models for them. So in that case, it creates an example of how coordinated mega-regional planning can work. In other mega-regions, there would first need to be some body set up that might be able to coordinate across all of the different regions that compose the mega-region. In mega-regions like the Texas Triangle and the California mega-regions, that could be the state DOT, but in others, there would need to be some coordination between states. So state legislatures and DOTs play large roles in determining the MPO governance structures. I mentioned already how some states will provide guidelines about what type of representations MPOs are expected to provide. And they can also be important in particular in making sure that MPOs are including representation for non-automotive modes, so including transit providers, including freight carriers. And going back to Florida, when we examined the travel demand models being used, we found that Florida DOT does create planning models for each of its MPOs to use, and they set it up by regions that are inclusive of multiple MPOs each. They're in the process of developing more advanced activity-based models, and in some cases dynamic assignment models. So the Florida mega-region might become the first to be using such planning tools across the entire mega-region, and could provide a good case of how that consistency could improve freight planning. So with this database, we've hoped to provide a tool that will allow for looking at to what extent these non-automotive modes, including freight, are being considered, because we feel that if they are not even being included in a region's model, there could be discounting of the benefits that projects will provide to those modes. Obviously, larger MPOs have more planning resources, so across a mega-region, it might be necessary to create some way for the smaller regions to have access to these planning tools. And we've found similar trends for each of these non-automotive modes. Freight, transit, active transport all follow similar trends of being better addressed as the MPO has more resources, which is an encouraging sign that making the resources available can lead to more planning consideration. So again, Dr. Walton is regretful that he's not able to present to y'all today, but you can contact me if you have any questions, and of course I'll be around for the Q&A here at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Rydell. I would quickly introduce our last presenter, Dr. Mihalis Julius. Dr. Julius is a professor with the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Memphis. He holds a PhD and Master's in Transportation from Rogers University and a bachelor's degree from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He is the chair of the Standing Committee on Ports and Channels and a member of the Standing Committee on Marine Environment of the Transportation Research Board, National Academies of Science, the co-director of the Biologistics Cluster, 6EX Institute of Technology at the University of Memphis, and the associate director of the Freight Mobility Research Institute at Florida Atlantic University. His teaching and research cover the areas of maritime and freight transportation, physical network vulnerability and resilience, capital, operational resource allocation, and multi-level, multi-criteria decision making.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Moen. I'm here with Ms. Kosanovic, who is from Tennessee DOT. She is our partner on this project, along with Daniel Palmer, who couldn't make it today. So, Amy wanted to say a few words.
Yes, we just want to thank Mike and his team at the University of Memphis for conducting this research. They've done so many different types of freight research projects for us, and then this funding comes from state planning and research dollars through the Federal Highway Administration into our Tennessee division. So we're just very appreciative to Mike and his team, and I'll just let him take the helm.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for
Yes.
the introduction. So today we're going to present the work that we're doing with Tennessee DOT on developing tools essentially to do freight flow disaggregation. So the objective is, if you have some OD data, let's say from Tran-SET, for example, at the county level, how can you disaggregate that flow at smaller zones, TAZ, zip code, whatever it is, so you don't have to go back to Tran-SET and pay a much higher amount to get the data at the disaggregate level. And the amount can get very expensive, especially if you're an MPO. So I'm going to try to be very brief and fast so we can keep up with the time, but as informative as possible. And obviously, we're going to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. And also, we have our contact information at the end if you guys want to send us email with more information on what we're doing. So we're going to start with a brief overview of the project, then show the production attraction methods that we have implemented, the OD disaggregation, and finally showcase the GIS tools that we built that incorporate those methods. So again, this is a Tennessee DOT ongoing study. I began last April, and we're hoping to have everything finalized and tested by the end of August. The team members from Tennessee DOT, Mr. Palmer, Ms. Kosanovic, and then from U of M, it's myself, a colleague of mine, Professor Mishra, and then Karl Ispujats, who is our PhD student who has done a lot of work for this project, doing a lot of coding. I think right now we're at 2,000 lines of code for these tools. So the question was, how do we create disaggregate freight ODs when somebody gives us aggregate data? So the first approach is to develop productions and attractions at the disaggregate level and then just do an OD matrix estimation. And the second approach is to get an existing OD that is at an aggregate level and then disaggregate it. And we did both of those things. And right now we're at the point, as we're going to say later on, where we're actually testing which one of the two methods is better. So the data sources that we have and we're using is the Tran-SET data, which is very popular amongst freight planners. But the main issue with Tran-SET data is the cost. So if you want to do something at the very disaggregate level, the cost gets pretty high pretty fast. Then we have some data from InfoUSA, which is establishment data. And then we have publicly available data from BEA, input-output tables. And then we have network data that was provided to us by Tennessee DOT. And then we also had to use some cross-call tables to go between SCTG2, IO account, and next 3-digit codes, because they were all with different codes, the different databases that we had. So the GIS toolbox has 2 sets of tools. The first one is pre-processing. So that's where all the pre-processing of the data happens, so we can use it in the disaggregation tools. Now, if somebody has already their data pre-processed and how they need to be for the tools input, then they can just go ahead and skip and go directly and use the disaggregation tools. So we have 3 pre-processing tools. One is solely for the Tran-SET data, and that's to go from SCTG3 to SCTG2 code that we need, and a couple of other things that it does we'll see later on in the next slides. Then we have a toolbox for the input-output accounts where we estimate industry shares, and then we have another toolbox that takes InfoUSA data and creates some aggregate and disaggregate values and shares for the 3 main economic measures that InfoUSA provides, which is square footage, values of sales, and employment. And then we're going to show the 2 disaggregation tools. One is the production attraction disaggregation and then creation of OD, and then the other one is the direct OD disaggregation. So 3 pre-processing tools, and the first one is the Tran-SET data pre-processing tool. So what it does, the main thing, is it takes the data from Tran-SET, which is SCTG3, and it goes down to the 2-digit code. Then it estimates an average length, which is going to be used at the OD estimation, miles between the ODs that the Tran-SET has. And then it also can estimate productions and attractions at the aggregate level, which is the level of the ODs that you bought from Tran-SET. So this is how the tool looks like. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this is how the tool looks like. On the right-hand side, you see just a flow chart of what goes in and what comes out of the tool. And moving on to the next one, which is special and economic data, which essentially is the InfoUSA database. And then the user needs to provide a county geographic file, and then which we're assuming is the disaggregate level, the aggregate level, I'm sorry. And then they need to provide whatever disaggregate level they want, and which one is the disaggregate zone special identifier, and then it's going to provide employment, sales, and square footage information that's going to be used for the disaggregation of ODs. The last pre-processing tool deals with the data from BEA. So what it's going to do is it's going to produce shares for different commodity producing and using industries. And all this data from the 3 disaggregation pre-processing tools is used at the 2 disaggregation tools we're going to see next. So there are 2 tools, right? One, as we discussed, that uses productions and attraction and then creates the OD. And then the other one is it takes a disaggregate OD, an aggregate OD, I'm sorry, and disaggregates it at whatever level the user wants. So the first tool is you have an existing OD, which in our case here was a Tran-SET OD. And then we use that one with a very simple weighted method where we use weights from the InfoUSA disaggregate zones and then from the BEA data for the input-output tables, producing and using industry shares, and then we use a weighted formula, which is we can make available to whoever wants. It's going to be part of the report, and that creates a disaggregate OD. Again, the level of disaggregation depends on the InfoUSA, how you want to pre-process that data at what disaggregation level. And this is just an example of some output using Shelby County, where we are right here, for some other TAZ zones. So we're starting from Shelby County and Shelby TAZs and where they go to the other TSEs. If you see something that doesn't have a color, that means there was no movement for that specific commodity moving between a TSE in Shelby County and a TSE in some other county in Tennessee. The second tool, what it does two things. First, it can create productions and attractions at the disaggregate level. And then the second thing, it uses three different methods. The user can select which one they want in order to get those productions and attractions, and then just create in a typical way an OD matrix. So nothing fancy with regards to that. Unfortunately, both tools take a significant amount of time because they do it by commodity, by industry, and then you also do it by mode. So they do take some time, but again, this is a planning level tool, so you're not going to be doing this every day. So you can let it run for 24 hours, get your data, and then plug it into a travel demand model that you have. So this is another example, result from the example from the second disaggregation tool that uses already productions and attractions, and then from there does the OD estimation. Now, where we are at this moment, right now we're finalizing and testing the GIS tool. As everybody knows, when you're building something with code, there might be some bugs, and we're trying to make sure that before we give a tool to be tested at Tennessee DOT, it's free of bugs. I highly doubt that's going to be the case. We're going to have some bugs, so we're going to have to go back and forth. The other thing we do right now is we want to validate and also compare the two disaggregate methods, the two disaggregation methods that we develop. Right, one just takes an existing OD and disaggregates. The other one goes through the process of developing a production and attraction set and then doing the OD. So we want to validate both methods and compare them with regards to how much time it takes and then what is the accuracy. And most likely we're going to do that utilizing some MPO models that already exist in Tennessee, most likely Memphis and Nashville. And then hopefully finish everything by August 2020, where we have the final report and the final tools delivered to DOT. So this is the contact information for Dan and Amy from Tennessee DOT and my information. So any questions after the presentation or for more, maybe you guys want the report or the tools, please feel free to send us an email. And that's pretty much it from our side. Thank you for your time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Julius, for this presentation. So this does conclude the presentation portion of our webinar. So I would like to ask the panelists and the attendees to feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so actually, until we have any question, I have a quick question to Dr. Katie.
Yes.
Actually, this is definitely not my research background. I have my background more into pavement and asphalt materials. But I would like to ask, do you have any idea how long does it take for the freight movement to return back to the normal levels? And again, I'm aware that your project is still at the beginning, but are you planning or do you have any idea about the loss in terms of money, about how much loss is caused by the hurricane due to the reduction in the freight movement?
So your question is how much money the DOTs or other MPOs will lose because of this reduced number of freight activities, right?
Yeah, exactly. And do you have also any idea about, because you mentioned that the hurricane causes the freight movement to go down, right?
Yes, first of all, port stopped operating for a week. They just closed entire complex for a week, so they definitely have some loss from that week. But the impact depends on the type of port or type of activities. The regional pattern, we did not see much impact compared to like local And it also depends on how much aggregated analysis you're conducting. If you just aggregate it in seasonal level, we don't see any big patterns, but definitely by daily, we see some changes and reductions in activity. So if you know exactly how many trucks are reduced by time, by the day or by the week, that we could infer some economic impact from this reduced amount of the freight trucks. But sometimes they delay their schedule, so they just did not move any cargo for 2 days, but the following 2 days we see huge increase because of this reduction for the past 2 days. So it's not just easy calculation by just looking at day by day. We have to understand how this temporal pattern is changing over time.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Because we have been doing a study, it was related to determining the damage that happens to the pavement as a result of the hurricanes. We had a recent hurricane in Louisiana in 2016. So yeah, it would be interesting to see the reduction in terms of money in all the aspects, in terms of freight movement, the pavements, and everything. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I do want to thank again the three presenters. I think this really turned out to be a very well technical program and presentation. Again, I want to thank the attendees. Please let me know if you have any questions about the seminar series and about Tran-SET. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for your time.